Yeah, I think the messenger is such an important part of the process, right? Like the message is only relevant as good as the messenger is believable. And I
Yeah.
think that's just, from a marketing perspective, like I don't, not trying to change it into like trying to, when I say marketing, I don't mean it like to salesy or to try to manipulate people. And when I say marketing, it's your ability to be able to increase your brand awareness so that allows people to perceive you as an authority on a particular topic. Welcome to another episode of Wabi Sabi. I got to say, Jim, we've been getting a lot of feedback on the podcast, and it's been great feedback. And I want to say, first of all, thank you to everyone who've enjoyed our message and our podcast and our recordings and sending us, personal messages, and also just the feedback we've been getting around the Wabi Sabi podcast and the content. It's been inspiring, actually, for me anyways, and inspiring to know that we're making an impact, and it's really great. So I think if you do find some resonance in the message that we're talking about in these podcasts, please send us a note or, write a comment on maybe our YouTube or Facebook or even on Spotify. And if you have a question or maybe a suggestion of a topic, I think Spotify will have actually, you can actually ask a Q&A, for example, and then, maybe we'll pick one of those topics to kind of discuss in the future. So today we're introducing the reason why I kind of, talk a little bit about messaging is because Jim has a message to share with all of us. And he mentioned about the topic that he wants to talk about today. And I thought this will be a really good one to discuss. And I want Jim to kind of lay out the context of what we're going to be talking about.
Great. Well, thank you, Lawrence. And yeah, I just want to echo your sentiments and comments regarding the feedback we've been getting. It's really exciting and heartwarming to receive that. The style and the context and the way we've gone about it has obviously resonated with some people who have appreciated the fact that we've exposed the soft underbelly and said, hey, this is our journey. This is us going through this. These are the challenges that we are facing, and we're doing the best we can. And we're taking you on the journey. So I just wanted to echo your sentiments in there. So today, really what I wanted to talk about was what you just said about a message, and the context and the theme was inspired by a conference and a seminar that I just came back from. For the longest time, and I think it's Jim Rohn who originally coined this term, was you never buy the message until you buy the messenger, right? And I have hung my hat on that saying and always have said, it's really important that people buy you and understand you and trust you for them to hear and listen to that message. And I definitely want to expand on that. But really what motivated the discussion was the flip to that, where sometimes, whether it's our judgment, our perception, our conditioning that projects a story onto whoever it is that we're listening to something, and we either relegate it, invalidate it, or don't listen to the message because of our biases. And so consequently, there's great wisdom and gold there for us that we're just not allowing ourselves to access because we're not allowing the person who's communicating it to be heard. So that's really the context of what I guess would be a great discussion point today.
Okay, that's great. Let's start with, I think my question would first off start with the message and the messenger, like the
Yep.
Jim Rohn thing. Let's start with like what that means to you and why that's important. And then we'll talk about the flip side, I think, afterwards.
Okay. All right. So really, I guess the biggest area that I've found it resonated very well, particularly from professional services point of view and our background in healthcare, was the fact where we went, people don't buy the message. So you could be communicating health and well-being to someone, or you're trying to communicate a greater vision or purpose for them. But if somehow they don't believe you, trust you, or went, yeah, who are you to tell me to guide me do this? They were less likely to follow that path. So that was always the start of it. And I think for the longest time, and I still hold true to that really makes a lot of sense to me, where someone who looks like a pilot is, for the biases that we have, it's the whole catch me if you can scenario with Leonardo DiCaprio, where he looked like a pilot and he carried that aura around him, so people believed it. And that's to me what I really gained a lot of certainty from. So that's been a real part of it. And it's just let's talk about that specifically and how you can relate to that. Whether you've had situations where you've either communicated that to people in the same way, or what have you. So what's your thoughts around that?
Yeah, I think the messenger is such an important part of the process, right? Like the message is only relevant as good as the messenger is believable. And I
Yeah,
think that's just, from a marketing perspective, like I don't, not trying to change it into like trying to, when I say marketing, I don't mean it like to salesy or to try to manipulate people. When I say marketing, it's your ability to be able to increase your brand awareness so that allows people to perceive you as an authority on a particular topic. And so your example of the airplane pilot that looks like it. My daughter actually just did a speech on trust, or truth.
right.
Sorry, truth. And one of the things that she talked a lot about was the cognitive biases that are present in people, and how to watch out and be aware of them. And one of them is the authority bias, right? Just because if I said, I actually in her speech, she said something about a Harvard study said this, right? Just saying Harvard study or Harvard professor, you already created a authority bias. I'm like, okay, that must be
Yep.
true, right? And that's the thing. That's the authority bias. And so Harvard, let's use Harvard as an example. Harvard has spent millions, if not billions of dollars in legacy and brand reputation to kind of create that, or in their medical program or their business program or whatever, even in the name Harvard, the Ivy League of it, to create that sense of authority. And which means that the message that comes through that becomes, I don't know, becomes, I guess, more true to people because it's
Yeah.
perceived that way. And I think that in nowadays, unfortunately, that there's so much information that comes through us. Like so much messages are coming through our feeds, through our lifetime, through our life in a day basis. We don't have time to research and to sift through any particular topic that you're not really necessarily interested in. And so therefore we get lazy. And because we get lazy, we are just allowing these information to come through based on, right, quote unquote, these authorities,
Yep.
and that has happened, especially, what happened over the pandemic. And there was a lot of things that were just coming through. And the worst part as well, in combination, I might be going a side topic here, but I think it's important because the news cycle as well, this is the world that we're living in. We're living in a world where there's so many, the incentive for a news medium to
Yeah.
produce isn't about the quality anymore of the particular content or the message that they're trying to send. It's, to them, it's about the speed of the
Yeah.
message. So which is like who's the
Yep.
first one to report X. And that has gone people to not fact check or to do the due diligence on the message. They're just going to rely on the messenger. And the more
Yep.
reliable the messenger, the more believable the message. And they actually don't even bother and they just pump it out, and that's what happens, right? So
Yep.
that's the
Yep.
downside and the good side of the messenger and the messengers.
Yeah, and that's exactly right. So to me, it was always about, I totally get that. And marketing companies have been doing this forever and ever, where if they want to associate a particular product or service with someone, they link them up with a figure, a representative who has the attributes and characteristics of what you want in a demographic, and they link them together. And the moment you look at them, you think of your product straight away. So it's marketing genius,
4 out of
right?
5 doctors approve smoking, right? Like,
Correct,
like that's
correct. Yeah, that's
the
it. That's it. That's exactly my whole point, right? And so I guess it was like the blind spot that I really wanted to talk about was, and I don't have a definitive answer about it, but it's just, when you suddenly, when you catch yourself going, holy smoke, like something that someone was saying, and the context of it, right? In a seminar that we went to, someone came up and had judged one of the speakers and the messages that had been said for, like 12 months ago. And what really impressed me was this person got up on stage and went, hey, listen, I want to apologize to you. I want to apologize to you because I judged you as having a particular perspective, you being this kind of person. And when you were saying this, I was making you wrong. Okay, I was making you wrong, even though what you were saying was true. So it was a reality check for me to just check in with myself to go, okay, look, don't take everything at face value and jump at shadows and that kind of stuff, and have a process of pre-qualifying and fact checking and making things right. But I think what it really did for me was make me really sit and think about what I'm thinking about, and not just make assumptions or jump to conclusions really quickly, because it's something that's really quick. And you're right, you mentioned about the most contentious period that we've all lived through in the last little while, where there was basically information, misinformation. People were led in different directions to go there. And a lot of them thought they were making it based on their own beliefs, whatever those beliefs were. And the reality was that there were biases, there were assumptions, there were messages and messengers that mixed everybody up. In the end, people weren't really thinking through about what they were thinking through. So contentious, but to me, it really highlighted what's going on. And at the moment now, anything that can be invalidated can basically cause confusion.
Hmm. Well, I think the message itself, I think, is I believe that messages around us are always there for us to kind of
Mm-hmm.
listen to. But the problem is what you're saying, which is like we only tend to listen to the messages when the messenger is someone we respect, or someone the messenger is really kind of like us, or we believe them to be
Yeah,
like us, or we believe them to be
yeah,
an authority. And there are a whole bunch of truths that I know that I literally just shut them out
yeah,
because of the
yeah,
messenger.
yeah,
And no, I'm not saying that's right, but it's intuitively that's what I do, and but at least I'm aware of it. And so, like for example, it might be, I don't know. Let's just say if I heard something from a particular person that I dislike, an authority or maybe like an author or someone, the message may be true, but I probably would just,
yeah,
no, I don't even want to listen to
yeah,
anything that person says. And we are living, like you said, a contentious period of time. There are so many people, there's so much hate on both sides of the fence that the messages are like just getting lost because they're so
yeah,
focused on the messenger, right?
yeah,
And like, I mean, let's go with, like, I hate to go to politics. I'm not endorsing Trump or anything like that,
yeah,
right? But I'm sure I don't follow politics that much. I'm not American, so we'll use him as an example. Like, he is very contentious as a person, and not many people
yeah,
like him as a person. But I'm sure over the 4 years that he was president, there was probably at least one thing. I mean, I don't know. I can't justify it. I don't have no
yeah,
proof, but I'm sure there was at least one thing that he did that was actually good, right? So I
yeah,
can't, I would doubt that everything that it was, but there's a lot of people would say that as soon as you bring that name up, like, it creates this, like,
yeah,
this
yeah.
trigger,
There's a
right?
visceral
Emotion.
response for
Yeah,
people.
to go
Yeah,
like, he's bad. Everything he does is bad. I'm like, well, like, really? Like I said, I have no skin in the game, but like, really, there must be something, right? But
yeah,
because of the messenger, we kind of ignore the message altogether.
yeah,
And that's a perfect
yeah,
example of what happens. And so I believe that so that the problem with that was what you're just saying, is that there's a lot of truth out there
yeah,
that we don't listen to simply because of the poor messenger and
yeah.
how they're branded or how they're perceived.
Yeah, totally, and that's the essence of it. It's like we could go down a whole rabbit hole here with it, but fundamentally, it's I think at the forefront of it is that generally as a society, and what I'm perceiving as well, there's less trust of government and less trust of media. So consequently, what traditionally were sources of, and let's say it, even healthcare providers, they've been put into question now with what's going on. So suddenly, the big pillars of truth for people, the bastions of filtering through and authority and presenting information to people, the community now is looking at it going, I don't know. What do I believe to be true? And so this is if you've now knocked out the authority figures that were sort of previously the ones that we trusted and we needed to trust. And it's from a line out of A Few Good Men with Jack Nicholson when he says, "You can't handle the truth," right? There's that part of it that I'm looking at. There's basically an element of going, yeah, I want and believe and I trust the authorities to give you the filtering information. And that's really what we condense, and we ethically have a requirement to provide information to people. So there's that part. It's the part that I just had me, and it just revealed me to me, really, is what I'm basically saying in that seminar, where I also looked at this situation and went, you know what, I actually had a similar view, and holy smoke, I've just basically become aware of some of my own projection and some of my own blind spots. That it was a real epiphany, and I went, it got me really thinking about, well, where else am I doing this? So that was the genesis
Yeah.
of.
And I think one of the main things to take away from, I guess, from this, how we can be better, is one, I would say, is that we need to be aware of our own biases. Two, is that we need to maybe question where our biases are affecting our judgment and seeing the truth,
Yeah.
right? That's what you're
Yeah.
really saying. And sometimes it's about listening to the message rather than allowing the judgment of the messenger cloud us from seeing that truth. And
Yeah.
that's really difficult to do, right? And I knew, during the pandemic part, it was really difficult because I'm like, surely, like, these certain people would say these things. They wouldn't just make it up, and it's like you start questioning and you don't really know. The thing is that I recognize that it took many years to build up
Yeah.
trust, and you were talking about the media. I mean, media was always been a big thing, the CNN or whatever, like that built up years to get to that credibility. But it's taken not that much to kind of bring that down. And I feel like what's happening is that there's the distrust is in those media and those mediums, but it's the rise of the other side. So I think it's just a shift in power,
Hmm.
right? And the shift in power, just like instead of like totally fully believing in the big media company, which we've always trusted all these years, now it's about the independent voices, right? The independent voices who really wants to kind of get down to the truth, who are really doing the work, right? Not the lazy work, and have no agenda other than to kind of speak the truth, because no one's really speaking the truth because there's so many things behind the layers. And so it's a shift of power. And what happens though is that I feel the reason why we got here in the first place is because the legacy companies and the legacy media, we'll use media more, you would talk about pharmaceuticals or medical, is because they got lazy in a sense that they just
Hmm.
trusted fully on their legacy that they have built and their trust that they've built. And rather than continuing on to build more trust, they just relied on the old trust. And at some
Yeah.
point that will falter. And that's where the shift in power starts to come through. I think the lesson I take away from that is like, be honest, be truthful, but you got to keep on winning that trust. It never
Yeah.
stops. Like, this is from a business perspective, this is from an entrepreneurial perspective, this is from a relationships perspective, a networking perspective. It's like, you got to keep building that trust. You can't just go all of a sudden like, oh, Jim's really respected now, right? So Jim
Yeah.
can get lazy and don't have to like tell the truth anymore. I can kind of maybe tell a couple of white lies. But
Yeah.
sooner or later, like if he doesn't continue to build that bond, those white lies are going to start breaking him down. But you're not going to see it
Yeah.
right away. It starts creating the cracks. And I think that's the lesson for me, is like to make sure we're always kind of striving to continue to build on the things that got us here in the first place when it comes to earning of trust.
Yeah, totally. And I think you highlighted a very good point there, specifically about the difference between earning trust and maintaining trust. Because the
Mm.
initial one, most of us are conscious of earning the trust of someone, rapport, etc., making agreements, honoring them. You highlighted a very good point, is how do you sustain that trust? How do you sustain that trust? Because sometimes, and I think from the perspective of the message and the messenger, sometimes you may deliver information and you are incorrect. And so you maintain trust in someone when you go, hey, listen, I led you, and it's not, it can be about anything. You actually help your position if you look around and say, you know what, I thought this was the case. I've realized now this was incorrect. I apologize. I was incorrect. I was wrong. But a lot of the time, a lot of us don't want to do that. A lot of us don't want to admit that there was an error in what we're doing. So we just keep going down that road, and suddenly there's an erosion of trust when people realize, hey, but you said that. No, I didn't. And so, this is what really resonated with me, particularly after the event, was that someone went, hey, I thought that. This is how I represented you and your message. And I now realize, with the fullness of time and sort of analyzing my own biases, I realized that I was incorrect and I want to apologize. And suddenly my respect and trust of the person doing that goes through the roof, because I realize that you will actually own your own stuff, if you feel you've been correct, rather than just following that path because you want to save face.
Yeah, exactly. It's like it's so hard for any of us to admit fault, right? And I
Yeah,
mean, it happens even in relationships, right? It's so hard for me to admit to
yeah,
Karen, so I effed up, I made a mistake,
yeah,
or
yeah, yeah.
like you were
As
right,
a
I was
kid, what
wrong,
about
right?
kids? What
Yeah,
about kids? Yeah.
exactly.
What about kids? To just, yeah, and so that's what I'm highlighting. Like, this is my mum and dad said this. So but sometimes your mum and dad are wrong.
Exactly. And it's such a hard thing to do. And let's go to the relationships, because I kind of started there.
Yeah,
It's the same thing. Like you talked about, how do you build trust and how do you maintain trust? Well, it's the same thing with relationship, right? It's easy to kind of build the trust in the relationship, but like, how do you maintain that over 20 somewhat years of marriage and relationship? That's hard, right? But
yeah,
that's what we do. We take it for granted. We take, like, I mean, how many of us have ever, I'll raise my hand up because I'm taking for granted of Karen, because we've been together for so
100%.
long, and
Yeah,
there's
yeah,
trust there. Like, I'm sure I can get away with, going to paddle for an extra game, or I'm sure I could,
yeah,
and because you go like, of course, like, we're married and, we've been together, like, of course there's that trust. I don't have to ask her,
yeah,
but like, that starts to chip away, right? And then, so like, if I'm not conscious of, like, okay, every action I take, it's like a deposit. I think I mentioned this before. It's like,
yeah,
sure, I can take so much withdrawal, but if I don't put the money back into, like, the relationship bank, yeah, I'm going to be in trouble. I'm going to be, I'm going to be owing a lot, and that could lead into trouble. And I think that's what happens. We just get too comfortable in our relationships. This is in friendships and romantic relationships and intimacies, and we don't charge that back in there, and we take it for granted because we've been together. We just expect it because we're husband and wife and been together. So, like, everything's going to be fine, but it's not always fine. And it will get to a point where the cracks will start to show. And so it's the same thing. And this is what I mean, that this whole thing around the message and the messenger is really across the board in everything you do in your life, not just in business.
yeah, and totally agree with you. And you're right in terms of relationship, because that's the cornerstone of it. And why I went with the angle with the kids was specifically, a lot of the times kids will get to a point where up until they're 7, 8, 9, 10, oh, mum or dad said that, so it's true. And then something like Google comes along and they'll fact check you, and the little buggers will work out that, like, there's poetic license in what you're saying, and so suddenly their perspective of you is tarnished. And so I think for us, the liberating part of it with our kids was, we always said to them, hey, listen, we're not always going to get everything right. We're not going to get everything right. And if we muck up, I'm going to come and let you know. However, I'm doing the best I can, and keep that in mind. And so to me, I think that was always really important, because it didn't hold, I guess, a standard that was unsustainable, that you were always going to get it right. And if we made it right, I was just going to double down and prove to you that I was right, just because I didn't want to prove my infallibility. It was just the process of going. I think from our kids' point of view, and even a lot of times when I've made mistakes and I've owned them, I think that builds more trust in the message that I'm delivering, because it's not a biased one, as much as biased as you can avoid, but it's one that's actually, I would hope, that's fairer, because you'll basically own your mistakes, as well as being forthright in any opinion that you have as well.
What's interesting about parenting? I just thought about it when you're saying that. It's like, parenting is probably one of the very few things where your kids didn't actually have to learn to build trust with you at the beginning, because it's
Yeah,
almost automatic. But actually, you actually have to start building trust to you a little bit later in life, like when they're hit about
yeah,
10 or
yeah,
12,
yeah,
when they actually start to question everything, and you go, oh,
yeah,
and I need to work harder now. Like, because it's almost like, yeah, when the kid is 5, like, they're like, what dad and mom says, it's it's gospel, right? It's like, but it's when they get into like the 11, 12-year-old, and they start thinking, you know, they're not that smart.
yeah,
They don't know what they're talking about. And they start questioning
yeah.
it, especially the teenagers. It's like, that's when you actually have to build the trust. But obviously, it's kind of weird, isn't it? Like, I just thought it was just kind of a
It
weird
is,
flip,
and
that
it's
you
very,
actually have to work harder.
and I think the trauma, and we've both seen it, Lawrence, in people that we've worked with, some of the most traumatic feelings that people have on the basis of the first relationship that you have is when they realize they can't trust their mum or dad.
Mm,
You know,
mm,
they're the ones that are really hard for people to grasp. That, hey, these people who are brought me into the world, I don't have trust in their message. I don't like that. I don't know what that's like, because with my mum and dad, I never got to that point where I didn't trust them. But I
right.
know a lot of people who don't, who for one reason there was never the psychological safety in a household where they could do that. So
Yeah.
consequently, they, this is an avenue or a door that's open in my mind that I hadn't even considered this as an option until you mentioned that. But fundamentally, that's where the message and the messenger get confused as well too, where you're
Mm,
basically going, I should have trust in this person, but something doesn't feel right. And it's a relationship then, I think, that this is part of the projection I was talking about,
mm,
where
mm.
you may have been burnt, there might be a wound, there may be a really traumatic experience that you now then project onto everybody who looks and sounds like that person. So consequently, you either will trust or not trust the message by virtue of that historical reference.
Yeah, it's hard. It's hard as a kid to kind of disseminate, between what your parents, have said to you all your life, and then realizing like, to break away from that too, to go, do I believe that? And
Yeah.
that's a tough thing. That could go, there could be religion, for example. If you're raised,
Yep.
say, Catholic or,
Yep.
whatever, it's like, you at some point, like you don't know any different. You're just gonna be raised in
Yep.
that. And then at some point you go, at some point, if you sometimes you never question it, right? You just never, this is how we do things. Or sometimes some of us get to a point where we're going, well, do I believe that? Or do
Yeah.
I believe it because my parents believed it and that's the community I grew up in? Or do I actually really believe? What do I believe? And that's the challenge that a lot of kids kind of face. But going back to what we said earlier around how, the legacy company, well, the parent is the legacy, right? Because they've, just say my daughter, she's trusted me for 14 years, right? Of course, I expect her to just trust me blindly now. But because I've never thought, because I'm your dad, of course you should
Yeah.
listen to everything I say. Of course, everything I say is the truth. But to her, when she started to question that, but I just have the assumption that I've already earned it, right?
Yeah.
Not taking it back. This is what I'm trying to get at. It's like, instead of just believing that, well, she naturally that's what she's supposed to do because I'm her dad, is to actually take a step back and go, no, this is actually where I actually have to earn the trust now,
Hmm.
right? Even more. I think that's where the miscommunication begins, because that's where I feel like, and like, I don't know, right? But I feel like my daughter would probably have more respect for me over the years if I actually spent the time now to earn that trust in a way that
Yeah.
is not given to me because of bloodline.
Yeah.
It's more like I have to earn it, which
Yeah.
is weird because it comes later.
Correct, correct. And it's actually, this reminds me of, we've spoken about values before and how important our values are because they act like a compass and help us make decisions. But when we really examine those, we really go deeper. You mentioned it a little bit before, and that just gave me a clue. When we deconstruct our beliefs about our way we do things, we look at it and say, are these my values, or are they my parental values, or are they my
Mm,
societal values, or are they my
right.
historical values? And so if your daughter turns around and says to you, "Hey Lawrence, how come you believe this?" or "Dad, how come you believe this?" you go, "Well, I don't know. That's what my dad taught." And so you can go down up the upstream and look at
Yep.
all the bloodline down this track, and you go, "This is 5 generations worth of belief systems that we
Yep.
always had, that we just took for granted that was true because it was my father or grandfather implanted those concepts."
Yeah, absolutely. And what the funny thing, Jim, I haven't told you this, like, but my daughter's been listening to the podcast every single week since it's
Okay,
been released.
okay,
And I'm like, at first, like, I'm so proud. And then I'm like, oh, wait a second. I'm pretty
oh
sure I
boy,
talk about you plenty through the
yeah,
podcast. Oh, crap. What did I
yeah,
say?
yeah.
So she's going to be listening to this. But
You
the
know
reason
what?
I'm
It's been
saying,
all good. It's been all great.
well, I
And let
hope
me just
so. I
say,
hope so.
it has been, and all in the outtakes. I'm just trying to clean it up for you here.
Yeah.
Trying to help a brother out. It's just to say, even in the out moments, it's just complimentary. Like it's
Yeah.
always. Anyway, go back to it.
Well, I think, so here's the thing. It's about accountability, right?
Yeah,
Because for me, it's so easy, right, to just assume no one listened to my podcast, especially my family,
yeah,
and I'll just say whatever I
yeah,
need to say,
yeah,
and
yeah,
then say something completely different at home or act differently at home from what I'm saying.
yeah,
But in this case, I don't. If my daughter hears on the podcast, I say something, and at home, I don't do that or take those actions or believe in
yeah.
those values or say that, or if I become a different person, she's going to call me out. Like all of a sudden, like that
Hundred
trust is
percent.
broken.
Yeah,
Right.
yeah,
And, and that's what we're talking about. It's like, of course, we all naturally do it in front of a camera or in front of certain people. We'll say certain things, but is that consistent across the board? If it isn't, that's where your intimate people, the closest to you, will see those cracks, and those cracks is what breaks that trust. Those cracks will lead to those things we're talking about, where the messenger, the shine of the messenger, becomes a little bit more dull and shady, and then now the message, even though you might be speaking the truth, never becomes truthful to that person.
Yeah, totally. And you know, I'm just reminded of the book Influence by Robert
Yeah.
Cialdini, when he talks about situation. So really, what we're talking about is, directly or indirectly, we are being influenced by
Hmm.
situations, by people around us, authorities, preeminent people in our world, mother, father, preacher, teacher. Those kind of people have big influence on us specifically. Now, I just remember there was a study that he talked about where, I'm not sure if you remember it in the book, where there was a study where there was a beggar on the ground, and there was a class for priests on humanity, and and they were running late for the class, and had the beggar on the ground, and the people who were running late were walking past the beggar, not helping the beggar out to get to class on time for a class on humanity
Humanity.
and helping. Yeah, so there was your message right there,
Yes.
right?
Yeah.
He was like, are you basically going through the motions, or are you living it?
Yeah.
And I remember, you know, these are the kind of examples I look at. And I remember ages ago, when we were hiring for an assistant at our practice many years ago, we had someone. And look, if it's one thing, I love being punctual. I love it. I like it. Comes from a wound of being punished when I was late, right? So I wear it. I own it. I don't like being late to things. Life has a way of trying to help you pass that with bringing people into your world who are always late, and it just helps you get over it, right? But that's just me. But one of our assistants who was coming for the role, let's say it was 3 o'clock appointment time, she had an interview. She was 10 minutes late, right? And ordinarily, I've gone, gee, that doesn't look good for you. That doesn't look good for you. You're 10 minutes late. You know, it's obviously not as a priority important. And she's come in, she's got blood all over her. And we've gone, is everything okay? You know, she goes, listen, I'm really sorry. I was driving here and I stopped, and a bird had been hit by a car. So I stopped, pulled over, and I nursed it, and I took it to a vet, and then I came here. I'm sorry if it means that I miss out on this job. It's okay. But I just went, how could you not acknowledge that gift in the person? So I had a cause to look at this and say, what you're looking for is a connected, compassionate team player. She did it, right?
Yeah.
But if you're
Yeah.
judging her just on the metrics of punctuality, you've lost a star there.
Absolutely. And so I think, to really analyze and, to kind of create some action steps, I think we got to look at from perspective. I mean, look at from two perspective, but the reality is that you can only, I feel, really make the major difference on you as a person. So the listener or the viewer. And so we so I'll just use me as an example to make it easier. Like as me, there's two perspective I could change based on the conversation we've had, right? From one is being the receiver, which is what we kind of started
Yeah.
talking about. So if as being a receiver, how can I be better? And number two is as a communicator, as a messenger, how can I be better? So let's start with the first one, which is how do I be a better receiver? And what we talked a lot about, we don't think we need to dive too much deeper, because it's like being able to analyze
Oh,
and to recognize you have certain biases in the world, within your own self, that could cloud you from hearing the right message that you need to hear, simply because you have a bias on the messenger. So we have to learn to kind of dissect that a little bit and see the message rather than actually falling prey to the messenger. That's hard to do. Okay. And it's going to kind of contradict a little, not contradict, but it's going to kind of put the opposition on the other side of how we're going to flip it. And I'd love to kind of add to this too. So on the other side is me as a messenger. Just because we're talking about this doesn't mean I shouldn't try to improve and increase my ability of trust as a messenger, because we know that that's how the world works. We understand that the society, that they are going to be, if you want to get your message across, you have to be a better messenger. If you want to get your message across, you have to earn that level of trust, right? And it's got to be consistent, and it's got to be and constantly evolving over time for your message to be heard. And this is why you need to improve your brand. You got to improve your perception. You got to improve how people see you. All these things are such a vital part as being the messenger. So I'd love to add
yeah.
your tips on how do we be
Actually,
a
you know
better
what?
receiver and a better messenger. Go
Yeah.
ahead.
Actually, to be honest, I don't think I've got anything more to add on top of what you just said. But I think that's pretty much exactly what I would have said. So rather than just repeating myself, I'd just go, Lawrence, I agree with that totally. That's exactly what I would have said had I gone first. So I've got nothing more to add there. I was going to say that a really interesting thing also happens when you're not, you go, no, but I don't do that. I actually listen to the message. I'm okay. I'm not sure if you've ever gone to a football game. I know you're a passionate sports person. And if someone's wearing the wrong colours, I don't care
They're
what
dead to
they
me.
say or do. They're dead. Exactly. That's my whole point, right? That's my whole point. And
They're a loser.
but that's exactly right. But how? But out of that scenario, we've all done it. I've done it when I've gone, "Hey, you're a really nice guy," and they talk sport, and I go, oh, "How could you? How could you be that the enemy?" So
You're
they're
the
the
enemy.
biases, and correct, correct. And I want to say, I want to relate a really, really funny story. Like I'm a passionate AFL supporter, Australian rules football, and I support Hawthorn, and the team that I've always disliked is Essendon, right? And disliked them with a passion. It came back to the fact that we had, in the 80s, we had these tussles. They were winning a premiership, we were losing one. It was just, rivalry. It was great rivalry. I've got great friends who are Essendon supporters who feel just as passionately against what I'm talking about. But here's how life teaches you tolerance, is that when we bought our practice, we bought the practice, as it turned out, and it was a kilometre from the home ground of the
Of
Essendon
course.
Footy Club. And so, of course, I'm having to drive past this darn ground twice a day, every day, on the way there, on
Oh,
the way back.
jeez.
And 90% of the people who came into our office supported this team, right? So it was just tolerance. And yet and after a while I went, no, they're wrong. They're wrong. They're wrong. Actually, they're quite a good person. They're actually a really nice person. They have poor taste in sporting teams, but they're okay. And it helped me realize my own biases and how ridiculous they things are, right? So your take on that too?
Yeah, absolutely. Like there's always, I'm a 49ers fan. So,
Yeah, yeah,
anybody who's a Dallas Cowboys, the Seattle Seahawks, like they're always enemies. Like we always have our
yeah,
arch
yeah,
rivalry.
yeah,
And
yeah.
then whatever they say, they're never right. So and it
Correct.
actually goes to show, actually, here's another way of looking at it, is like if any sports commentator talks badly about my team or my players,
Oh,
they're
yeah,
totally wrong. Like
yeah,
what are you talking about? It's like
yeah,
automatic
yeah,
defense. I'm like, you don't know what you're talking about. And that's happens. Like we don't like criticism of our own tribes and our ideas. And so therefore, the message, we don't want to hear it. But how true
yeah,
it is sometimes, where you going, oh yeah, that person, what that person said about that 2 years about that player. Yeah, yeah, he was pretty right. But I didn't want to
yeah,
hear it at the time.
yeah,
And
yeah,
it just goes to show it's in every aspect of your life, through sport. We talked about in relationships. It's going to be happening in business, and it's going to happen in entrepreneurship, and in everything. And
mm,
this is why I think we got to be careful of it. Like if you're working for someone and you don't like your boss, I guarantee you, no matter what he or she says to you,
yeah,
you're gonna just like, no, it can't be true. But they could be telling you the truth and you don't want to listen to it. Like, if you don't like your boss and your boss says, hey, like I think you need to improve on A, B, and C, you're just gonna say, well, he or she is just a mean, son of a whatever, and just like, and not really take that criticism to heart and go, am I really that? Can I actually improve?
yeah,
And maybe I could be a
yeah,
better person by, actually improving on those things. And I think that's the one example of another area where if the message was true, but the messenger you didn't respect, you could have learned something from it. But that's so hard to do, Jim. I gotta say, it's
yeah.
so
It is.
hard to
Yeah,
do.
and it fits in. And honestly, Lawrence, to be honest, we could talk about this for the next 3 hours and just keep circling back for example, example, example. And really, I think what I just wanted to highlight, if there was an outcome of this whole podcast episode, was just really to make us aware of that. And then you've highlighted it exceptionally well about there's two parts. There's our part of basically providing information and also receiving it. And how do we keep that balance and that harmony and declare our biases or become aware of them so that we can get better? So we're making better quality decisions. So that to me is what I walked away from that seminar from, was basically saying, how can I override my own biases to as much as I can to make the right decisions for me, not reactive ones, not ones that I like. I like this person, so I'm prepared to just cut off that part of my brain that doesn't analyze things critically and work out whether this is right for me. Because I want to be popular, I want to be liked, I like that person, etc., etc. That's really the reality of what marketing is when you're putting up a figurehead. You're trying to basically placate the objections by having you fully neuro associate to that person and go, I like that person, nothing else is important. And really, to me, that's just having an awareness around that. So if there's
I
something
think,
specific you want to add to that, yeah,
yeah, there's one specific thing I want to add, and we can end this, which is I think it's about the challenge with all of this thing that we said, we already understand the messenger, we always understand the receiver. But I think the one thing that started this thought process for you was having the ability to admit when you're wrong. I think
Yep.
that's really, really important. And I would love for I challenge every listener or viewer of this is to going, has there been something that you recently believed that has come to light that you were actually wrong? And you can admit that to yourself. And what if you took that opportunity, an action step, to go and actually apologize? Again, or at least I don't have to apologize. It's more of an acknowledgement, or acknowledge to maybe a person, whoever, that you were mistaken, or I should have thought through this, what a scenario better, or whatever it is. And I wonder if the challenge was like, can you do that? Right. First of all, to yourself. The second challenge is harder, which is to go up to that person or whoever it is, to say, you know what, I just want to tell you blank. That's hard, but I wonder what would happen. I wonder how that relationship would change. I wonder, how much of how much of that trust starts to becoming different. It's just a question. It's just something for everybody to think about, and it'll be worthwhile to kind of hear some of those stories. Jim, I love that. Thank you for bringing up this topic, and I really thoroughly enjoyed it. I learned a lot from it too, and it's definitely heightened my awareness of being aware of where I could be, having these biases, and I definitely admit that some things I say here, it's like with regards to other people, it's like, is it am I saying my truth, or is it just because I feel like it's the right thing to say? So it's like always turning my mind. I really want to try to make sure that I'm constantly speaking my truth and into my values.
Yeah, totally. And you know what, Lawrence, especially when we're coaching, you will have had the same scenario where you're talking to someone and you're really talking to yourself.
Oh,
Right? You're really
most of
talking
the
to
time.
yourself. And the biggest coach job is on yourself. And so in this process, that was the realization I had for me, was to just go, hey man, where are you doing this? Where are you reinforcing your own biases? So yeah, I really enjoyed it as well, and certainly even in discussing it and thrashing it out has helped me consider this even further. Like your question, where else can I, or what can you like? So I'm definitely going to take that away and apply it in my world, because this is, we're both on the same, we're both on a journey and of improving and self-actualization, and we want to bring as many people along with us in the process. But sharing and letting people know that we're doing our own work too, I think gives us street cred as well, and trust, which is along the lines of what you were talking about earlier.
Well, guys, I hope you enjoyed this podcast. I hope that you enjoyed the message of what we're trying to say. And if you have any feedback or about the messengers of this podcast or the message of the podcast, please share this on comments on YouTube, or Facebook, or Instagram, or on Spotify, or whatever podcast channel, and provide that feedback for us, because we'll love to listen to it, and we'll love to see how we can grow better and provide you a better service. So until next time, we'll see you on the Wabi Sabi podcast.